What an honor. We have our Governor, Kristi Noem, and our Lieutenant Governor, Larry Roden, here today. And for an ag community, I mean, how special is it that we are one of the few states, maybe the only state, that has a governor and a lieutenant governor that once made their living in farming and ranching. I think that's pretty cool and pretty special to me, and I'm sure it's special to you too. Lieutenant Governor Roden, if you didn't know this, he had been in the legislature for 16 years. He ran for state senate, and then he was asked to be the running mate for Governor Kristi Noem. And you might not also know this, but the lieutenant governor presides over the Senate. So I've gotten the opportunity to work with him for the past 4 years. And let me tell you, he cares about public service, he cares about people, and he is a statesman. And it's been a pleasure to work with him. So without any further ado, I want to welcome the 39th Lieutenant Governor of South Dakota, Larry Roden.
Well, thank you, Senator Tobin. I'll tell you, that is one of 105 reasons that I love working in Pierre during session. We have 105 legislators, 35 senators, and 70 House members. And I'm always amazed at the heart of service that they all have for the state of South Dakota. I will say this. Eric mentioned that I've served 16 years in the legislature before the governor tagged me. That's when I first got to meet Governor Noem. In 2006, she was in the legislature. I was majority leader at the time. So it didn't take us long to recognize our commonality, the way we thought politically, just our backgrounds. And she became a huge asset to me in working on some property tax issues at the time. And 2 years later, I went to the Senate, and we developed a relationship. When she was considering running for governor, I always thought lieutenant governor would be a cool job. I thought it would be really special to be lieutenant governor for somebody like Governor Noem that I had developed such a keen respect for and a working relationship. But as Eric touched on, I really never thought that would happen, because typically a governor that's an East River farmer rancher would never pick a West River farmer rancher. And that's because you want to balance the ticket. And that's why, as far as we can tell, maybe the first time in the history of the United States that it's been a farmer rancher governor, lieutenant governor. Well, that's pretty special to me, especially with Kristi Noem, because our first year, I think the first year at the last day of regular session was the bomb cyclone. Next year, the last week of session, I believe we got our first case of COVID in the state. So we've had a long string of some very significant issues in South Dakota. And the cream has risen to the top. And our governor I've always said our governor has a spine of stainless steel. Because she stood alone in the United States when 49 other governors were shutting their states down, and we stayed open for business because she trusted people to make decisions on their own and exercise their own sense of personal responsibility. And that defined the state, and it made our state an example to a nation. And we continue to take that kind of a lead. So I told the governor I'd be brief, but I am very proud, very honored to have the opportunity to work with a governor like Kristi Noem. She's got a heart of service. She's got a heart for the Lord. And I'm west of the river now, so I can say this. She is tougher than a Waffle House steak. Governor Kristi Noem.
Well, hi everybody, how are you? It is so wonderful to be with all of you. Thank you so much for inviting us to come down here. And I'll tell you, the reason that I'm here in winter today is because Aaron Tobin asked me to come, and I said, absolutely, I will do anything for you. So I want to thank you, and I wanted you to hear straight from me. Thank you for sending her to Pierre. That she goes there and she does her research. She works so hard. She studies the issues, and she's tough, and she makes the best decisions for her district. And that's what I think is incredibly important. So could you all give her a round of applause and thank her for all the work that she does. She said, I think that, I said, I've been thinking that I should go just talk to a few people, do some town halls so they know what we accomplished this legislative session. And she said, would you ever come to Winter? And I said, absolutely. So that's why we're here. So I hope you're here to ask some good questions and give me some good feedback on things that I can be working on for you and for your families, and just know that we so much appreciate all that you do to keep South Dakota strong each and every day as well. We have I spent the day yesterday at my ranch up by Watertown, so I was up there. I actually got to babysit my grandkiddos yesterday afternoon and evening, so that was fun. Miss Addie is going to turn 3 here pretty soon, and Branch is 1 year old and weighs 44 pounds. So I think the kid's going to be a linebacker or something. I don't know. But then Cassidy and Kyle are having their 3rd baby, and she is due in April. So they are going to have 3 for a little while under 3, because Addie doesn't turn 3 till June. So they are overproducing, which I like. That works for Grandma. I don't know if I could have kept up with it, but it works for me. So. But we started our day then and drove down to Madison and signed a bill into law on quantum computing. And I told my staff that was very mean of them to make me get up in the morning and go talk about quantum computing, because who understands quantum computing? But it is a new technology and type of research that Dakota State University is going to be participating in. As you know, they are one of the top 10 universities in the country that is investing in cybersecurity. They train a lot of our NSA employees in this country. They help protect our systems from hacks from Russia and from China and from different threats. They train a lot of folks that go into the Department of Defense and the military and keep them safe and give them information that we need to fight off countries that hate us. And so they are uniquely qualified to enter into this new field called quantum computing, which essentially means that we will now have students that are being trained in how to take what would take a computer 20 years to do to be able to do in seconds. The ability it will have to process information and to come up with answers in a way that is faster and smarter and has more integrity than what we do today, I think is going to be a real gift to South Dakota, and will allow us not only to be on the forefront of that, but it'll be important to keeping our country safe, and it'll allow our kids that want to be trained in that space to be able to stay here in South Dakota. So we signed a bill there into law and did an event there, and then headed down to Mitchell and did a town hall there and did 2 bills there that we signed into law and did bill signing ceremonies that had to do with education. I think if you followed the news much this year, you know that education was a big priority for me. The one bill that we signed into law was an investment into literacy. We all know that kids can't learn if they can't read, and that they can't be successful if they don't have the ability to do so. And frankly, across this country, people are struggling, and our kids' reading scores are going down, our math scores are going down, our kids are not doing as well. We're doing better here in South Dakota than virtually any other state. But we want to make sure that our kids are the overachievers, the cream of the crop, that they're getting the best of the best. And this was a literacy program that has been proven scientifically to be extremely effective, and our legislature wrapped their arms around it and embraced it, and we signed that into law today. We also signed a bill about teacher salaries. We have increased funding to school districts since I've been governor almost 30%. But that has not translated down into the classroom into teachers. And we have a teacher shortage in the state. We can't recruit them because our surrounding states pay more than they do. We have a lot of people that live in our communities that are teachers that invest their whole lives into our kids, yet we're not paying them adequately. And today we signed a bill that would reform the system to make sure that we are putting those dollars into our teachers and giving them the ability not just to get the training that they need and that they want, but also that they're compensated for that. And that they're compensated in a way that I think is going to be appropriate. It sets a minimum teacher salary, but it also makes sure that it works for small districts and large districts, and it's really important to make sure that we do that to address this shortage, but also that we reward those folks who chose that career many, many years ago. We've also last year started an apprenticeship program on teachers. They gave them the chance to be trained in the classroom. What happens in a lot of small towns across South Dakota, I've seen it raising my kids and wherever I go, we may have people that work in our classrooms as teachers' aides, or they may be paraprofessionals that work in the classroom that love education, but they don't have their certificate. They didn't get a 4-year degree to become a teacher and lead a classroom. Well, now we have an apprenticeship program that we championed last year that we are putting forward as well through the Department of Education, that we're training 90 people that are those folks in classrooms right now, so that someday soon they will have their own classroom and be teachers in those communities. That means that if somebody lives in a town like Winter and they've been a teacher's aide for 20 years, they don't want to move away and go to college and get a 4-year degree or have to do something where they leave their family and they quit their job. They can stay right there in their school and in their classroom, earn their certificate, and someday get their own classroom and be paid more to do that and live the dream that they've always wanted to live too. So I think that's a wonderful opportunity that we have in a lot of our small school districts to fill some of these teaching positions that we need to have filled. So I'll give you a quick recap of the budget and my priorities, and then I'm going to let you ask me some questions. Does that sound all right? Now, before we do that, what I'd like to do is, we've got some legislators here in the room too. I'd like to ask them all to come forward and introduce themselves and tell us where they're from, what part of the state they're from, what the legislative district is, and a little bit about themselves. We have a fantastic legislature. What you do not know probably is that we are, I think, one of the first states in the country to go into session every single year. We go in right away in January, but we're the very first state in the country who ends our legislative session, which means we have the shortest. We go in quick, we pass a budget that's balanced, we pass our bills or we kill bad bills, and then our legislators go home. They all have other jobs, they all have other things that they do, they go there to serve you. And what that also means, though, is that a lot of our bills in South Dakota, people across the country are watching. They're watching them because it's the first time this idea maybe had a committee hearing. It's maybe the first time this bill was proposed and talked about, and the facts are being debated. And then when we go into session and a decision is made on that bill, the rest of the country is watching that to say, oh, that's interesting. That might be something we want to do here in Kansas or in Nebraska or in Texas or somewhere else. So what these legislators do is not just hard work for those days that they're there. They're also being brave because they recognize they have to write good policy because the rest of the country is going to use it as model legislation. We did a bill just last week that I signed into law on anti-Semitism. It was saying that anti-Semitism was wrong. It defined what it is, that it's hate crimes, and gave examples of it that we put into our state law so that when somebody perpetuates acts of hate against our Jewish community here in South Dakota, that we will be able to not only have there be severe consequences, but also we'll win in court and we'll win cases and we'll make sure that it is stopped everywhere. I don't think people recognize quite yet what happened across the world when we signed that bill into law. It's like the whole world exploded. We have thousands of threats and death threats coming into South Dakota now because we did a bill like that that stood with the Jewish people, that stood with our allies of Israel, who have always been our allies. I turned to someone who was telling me this just 2 days ago about how our office was being blown up and there was this threat out here and this is going on and we're getting them from all over the country and then all over the world. And I literally turned to someone and I go, they do realize these are the chosen people of God, right? I mean, they do realize that, right? And they said, no, I don't think they realize that. But I'm proud of the fact that in South Dakota that we just don't stand for hate crimes and that we understand that people should not be treated that way, that it shouldn't be right, and that we stand by our allies and by people that we know are important to have not just strategically on our side, but because of our heart and the heritage of this country, that they are people that we should stand with. So, these legislators make decisions on bills like that and pass something like that, and since then we've had over a dozen different states call us and ask us if they could use that bill as an example of what they want to pass in their states too. So because they were brave enough to do that and to vote on that bill and pass it, other states will follow that, and it'll hopefully lead the nation in being a much more safe place to be, especially on the national security issue as well. So let them introduce themselves a little bit to you and say whatever you want to say. I'm going to turn you loose. I don't know, Rocky, I might put some limits on you, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your district and what your priorities were this session, how you felt it went, and how long you're going to stick around.
Thank you, Governor. Our governor is awesome, and she looks for solutions, not for problems. And when she talks about we're developing bills and working hard together, she offers herself and her staff 24 hours, 7 days a week, year-round, so that we can bring good legislation. And it's really worked out well. We have a great working relationship. Now, my name's Rocky Blair. I'm from Ideal. Winter's a suburb of Ideal, if you don't know that. I know a few of you here, and I am not going to run this next session. I have some things that I need to take care of, but we have some very good people in the room that are actually looking at running for that position. And you guys have been great, and there is no doubt, absolutely no doubt, District 21 is the best one in the state of South Dakota.
Well, I've already announced that I'm Erin Tobin, Senator for your district, and I'm glad the governor brought up the fact that we really do make big decisions in our legislature that other legislatures look to. And I think one of the big bills that I'll say we passed, because it was the governor's bill, was the foreign ag land ownership bill to make sure that countries that hate us, like China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, and North Korea, will never own agriculture land in South Dakota. And that's because those countries have shown a history of any opportunity that they can get, they would hurt us. And other countries can own up to 160 acres, but we wanted to put that limit on it because we can see far enough into the future to know that China is in an arms race. They're looking to find nuclear weapons to hurt us. They're trying to spy on us. And if they can purchase agricultural land, we know that they're going to use it for not good things. So I know that other states in the nation will be looking to that bill that we passed, that law that we passed this year. And I will say that I got a lot of stuff done this year, and I say I, but truthfully it is a we. There's 105 legislators, and then the governor signed it. But we passed 13 out of 14 bills that I brought this year. And one other really important one I want to bring up because it was a really hard bill for me. It was brought to me by a constituent last fall, so almost 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago. And this family, about 35 years ago, had one of their family members murdered in their home, and they were held at gunpoint. And they were asked to come in and sit for a commutation hearing. And they were told that they could sit once a year until that prisoner was commuted. And this prisoner had a life sentence, violent crime, and they couldn't imagine preparing 6 months for a commutation hearing and then coming down from that hearing and then being asked to go back again. And, truthfully, I felt inadequate for the job. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a judge. I told any other legislator I would do all of the work and then let them carry it. And they said, no, you're going to carry it. You can do it. And it got amended, an unfavorable amendment in the Senate, and I stripped that amendment off by a vote and passed it over to the House, passed it out of the House, and the governor signed it. And that family was in tears when that bill passed out of the House. And I don't cry very much, but I was near tears too. That bill was very, very important to me. And we all have important things that we do. Everything that we bring up to peer is important. But then there's some that just really will always leave a mark on your heart and soul forever. And that was definitely one of them. But I love working with Rocky. I'm very sad to have him leave, truthfully. And I know that he'll have his phone open to me, and we'll pretend that he's still just in the legislature with me in the next chamber. So anyway, if you guys have any questions about anything, let me know. And thank you for taking the time to come today. I appreciate it.
Well, Hello, my name is Rebecca Reimer, and I'm District 26B, one of the two districts with the AB district setting. So I have rural Buffalo, Lyman Jones, a little bit of Hyde and Hughes. So I live on the Oklahoma side, Lyman County. And I thank Governor Noem for coming down to the town hall and being here. And you know, I have to agree with Rocky and with Aaron. Governor Noem has done a great job of putting South Dakota on the map. And I think about a couple of things from this session. For me, the theme was collaboration and cooperation. And I saw that through the healthcare legislation that came through. I saw that through landowner rights bills. I saw that through education. All those bills were a compromise to get to where we were and to get that across the line and have the governor sign it. You know, we talked about, Governor Noem talked about how other states look to us and for the anti-Semitism bill. But one that I want to bring back was from last year when we had the UCC bill. Governor Noem said, nope, that's not going across the line, I'm going to veto it, it's done. Well, they brought it back this year and broke it down into two bills. And you know what? I have my friends from Kentucky calling me going, what'd you do on the UCC bill? What'd you do? How's it work? And I send them the legislation and they can use that as model legislation. Yeah. Yep, and they fixed it, and but other states do look to us. So thank Governor Noem for recognizing that and fixing it and working with all of us on our legislation. So thank you for having me today. It's great to see all of you. I do see a few of my constituents here as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I see we have my friend, the former Ag Secretary, Kim Banneman, is here as well, so give her a round of applause. I love her dearly. So she and I were farming together years and years ago when I first got to know her, and then we both got elected to the legislature at the same time. And it was the same year, right? Or were you there before me? Same year, yeah. And the whole world changed because Kim and I showed up. But no, so it's wonderful to see you. And you know, we use this as an opportunity, this legislative session, to talk a little bit about what South Dakota has done and what the future looks like. Since I've been your governor, I campaigned on growing this state. If you remember back in 2018, I was talking about the fact that South Dakota was doing fine, but that we were dying. That our economy was going downhill, people were leaving our state, our kids and grandkids were having to leave to look for the careers that they wanted, that we saw that we were having less and less businesses that weren't able to expand, and that we needed to turn that around. And so that was really what I came to all of you and asked you to support me as governor and tell you that I was going to do, that I was going to tell our story, keep our taxes low, keep business certainty, and make sure that we protected our way of life. If you remember in 2019, we had a bomb cyclone that kind of hit the state very hard in March, and we ended up dealing with FEMA and flooding. 63 of our 66 counties were declared federal disaster areas, and we put back together communities and roads and bridges and built water treatment plants and helped people get through it. And I thought for sure 2020 was going to be a lot better, and then COVID came and everything in the whole country broke down and looked a little crazy and like the world had lost its mind. I would say that for here in South Dakota, we made very different decisions. That we made decisions on not mandating things, trusting people, not closing businesses. We didn't define essential businesses. We didn't take the elevated unemployment benefits. But then also I made a very aggressive decision to tell our story and to tell people what we were doing here, and that if they wanted to live in a state that was still free, that they should come here. Because we had businesses here that were looking for workers, that we wanted to grow. We had small towns that were frustrated because they were dying, their main streets weren't thriving, their grocery stores were struggling, they didn't have hardware stores anymore, and they wanted to keep their way of life. And so we started to tell that story. We also saw a big impact come in from federal government, and I recognized this legislative session that it was going to be different than the previous few legislative sessions. We were going to probably have the more normal session as far as a budget standpoint than what we had seen in a few years. Obviously during COVID and the years after, we saw lots of federal dollars come into South Dakota. We rejected a lot of federal dollars, but some of it we used for economic development in places that we really could help people that lived right here in our state. But also we were breaking records in sales tax and revenue because our businesses were doing so well. I think everybody whose state shut down, they came to visit us. And then when they visited us, they said, oh my goodness, I love this place, I want to move here. And tens of thousands of people have moved here to this state because they wanted to be like all of you. This legislative session, we recognized that our growth was going to be a little bit closer to what would be normal in South Dakota. We were still increasing. Our revenues were increasing. We had more money in reserves than we've ever had before. We have a AAA credit rating. We paid off debts and bonds. We paid off debts and bonds for our universities and our technical schools that we were doing very well. We built a railroad. We put a high-speed internet access across the state. We were fixing roads and bridges and dams. And all of that was getting done because of the success of South Dakota. And we also did the largest tax cut in South Dakota history, which I think is incredible that you can do all that and let people keep more of their money and their economy still is strong and stable and growing. But I also wanted to remind the legislature and to remind the state about this budget session should be about what is the priorities of state government. I think if you turn on your TV at night, sometimes you get confused as to what the government is supposed to be in your life. When I was sworn in as governor, I remember standing there at the ceremony getting sworn in for the first time, and was thinking, they kept talking during that ceremony about how historic it was. Now I knew that it was historic because they were saying that I was the first female governor and that was a big deal. But at that ceremony, they kept making a point of the fact that I happened to be getting sworn into office on the 100th anniversary of women first getting the right to vote. So I realized that, wow, that's kind of incredible that just 100 years ago women couldn't even vote, and now we're swearing in our first female governor. And the whole ceremony was built around that, and I started to think, and boy, I better not screw this up, because it's kind of a big deal. And I got nervous for the first time, and I remember thinking, well, what am I promising to do? And what I was promising to do is I put my hand on my dad's Bible and raised my right hand was just two things. Was that I would uphold the Constitution of the state of South Dakota, and that I would uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And there was really only two promises. And that I could do that, but that probably wouldn't be all that hard. So I want you to know that when I made every decision from that point forward, those were the only two questions that I asked myself to start every discussion on every bill, on everything that we fund. In fact, my whole staff that's in the governor's office, raise your hand if you work in the governor's office, because I made them come with me today so you would see their faces. If you have something you want to talk about today that you don't want to talk about in front of the whole group, you can find one of these folks that work for me and they'll help you figure it out. Sometimes people are shy and don't want to talk at town halls, so I brought a few staffers with me that you can do that. But we have a process in the governor's office where we fill out a bill analysis on every single bill that comes forward. And that is a bunch of questions that my staff has to answer for me. It is, what happens if this bill becomes law? What happens if this bill doesn't become law? What is the precedent that we're setting if this bill becomes law? What happens to the next generation if this bill becomes law or if it doesn't? I don't want people to think about what happens 6 months from now. What's politically correct right now in an election year or when November comes. I want people to think about what happens 10 years from now or 20 years from now when my grandkids are growing up here. What did we open the door to that's going to impact them if we sign this bill into law or if we don't? Somebody told me when I first got elected to the legislature, he said, Christy, remember, every day you're in session, our way of life is in jeopardy. And I took that seriously. It reminded me that every bill we sign can change everything, and every bad bill we kill can save everything. And so that's the viewpoint that I look at everything that comes forward. The responsibility that our state constitution gives to state government to do is really to take care of three things. Number one is to take care of providers. Providers are people that are out there taking care of those who can't take care of themselves. People like in nursing homes, assisted livings, developmentally disabled people, people who struggle with mental health challenges that can no longer care for themselves. That's a responsibility that state government has to make sure that we are facilitating reimbursement rates that allow that to happen. We don't have to do the caring. We can partner with private industry to do it, but we do have a responsibility to look at funding and make sure that we're doing a good enough job at it and that we're doing a good job at it. The second thing is education. We have a responsibility to educate our kids and that every child who lives in South Dakota has access to good, free public education, and that we are doing that in a way that is important. So talking about that is important to me, and I looked at the fact that since I had been governor, that we've increased education funding almost 30%, historic levels to school districts, but it wasn't translating down to teacher salaries, and knew that we could do more this legislative session to make sure that people knew that education was a priority, but it wasn't just a priority to just hand them money. It was a priority to make sure that we were spending our money closest to our kids, and who has more of an impact on a student than a good teacher. A good teacher that's invested their life and their time and their effort into them. The third thing is state employees. Somebody's got to run the state and run the agencies and the departments, and we actually have less state employees than we have before. We've consistently gotten more and more efficient. We cut $70 million out of our state budget this year, which I don't think a lot of legislators are bragging about, but you should. You're consistently saving taxpayers more and more money and doing that, but doing it in a way that we're also recruiting the best and the brightest to help run the state, to give us the best ideas that we can have, to make sure that we're doing it in a way that works for the people that live here. The first tax cut we signed last year the idea was brought forward to me as a tax cut for businesses, and it was brought to me by a state employee who said, I don't know why we tax our businesses on this. I said, I don't either. Let's cut it out. And we immediately did it, and legislators supported it and got it done. So it matters who runs our agencies and departments to make sure that they're done well. And I wanted to normalize the conversation back with the legislators, because a lot of them were new, that is what the responsibility of state government is to fund those three things. That we can come forward with lots of pet projects and lots of things that we want to do, but we have to ask ourselves the question is this something the state government and taxpayers should be paying for? That capital is filled with lobbyists, hundreds of people who get paid there to be advocates for something. Who advocates for the taxpayer? Who's up there for the guy who gets up every day and goes to work and struggles to pay his gas bill and buy his groceries right now? I consider that my job. And this year we went a long ways in making sure that we were talking about taxpayers, getting more efficient, funding our priorities, and making sure that we were doing what we were supposed to do to be responsible. We already talked about the foreign-owned ag land bill, which was really important to me to get done. I've got to tell you, China hates us. And I've been involved now in agriculture policy for 30 years. So I watched them over those years since I've been working. I farmed and ranched for longer than that, but I also was involved in policy and started showing up when I was mad at Tom Daschle for the death tax and raising our taxes. So I started to show up at his meetings, and then served on the State Farm Service Agency committee for a while, and then worked on several different commissions on policy. But I saw that China was coming into our country and buying up our fertilizer companies. They then started to buy our chemical companies. They were buying our processing systems, our packing plants. They also then now are stealing our intellectual property. In fact, this summer we had Chinese spies in South Dakota trying to steal our genetics on our crops and to take it from us, and the State Department had warnings on us not to meet with them. So if you are farmers or ranchers in this area, just don't accept a visit from a Chinese delegation unless you talk to me first, because they're not here for good purposes. They're here for nefarious purposes. They have a 1,000-year plan to become a world power, and they will put their people through incredible hardships in order to do that. I'm just not certain if Americans are even willing to be inconvenienced anymore to stop this from happening. So my hope is that we will continue to talk about the real threat that they are to us, and the fact that banning them from owning land in our state is incredibly important, because we also have Ellsworth Air Force Base. Now, Ellsworth Air Force Base in western South Dakota has protected this country for the last 50 years with the B-1 bombers. In fact, when those strikes went down in the Middle East just recently as a result of October 7th, it was our bombers and our airmen from Ellsworth that went there and conducted those strikes. Those pilots sat in the seats of those bombers for 36 hours and didn't get out running those missions until they got back. And they did that to protect America and to protect our safety and our security. They also, the MQ-9 Reaper drones run out of Ellsworth. But the B-21s are coming to Ellsworth, and it was strategically chosen by our Department of Defense because of where it is located. When I was in Congress, I served on the Armed Services Committee. We made decisions then to move all of our assets to the middle of the country because China and Russia were spying on us with subs and ships offshore and in highly populated areas where their nefarious activities could be covered up and be undetected to steal a lot of our security assets and to steal our information. We moved things to the middle of the country. The B-21s are being put at Ellsworth on purpose because it can be protected, and most of the threats we'll have to respond to will be over the North Pole. It is our responsibility as South Dakotans to recognize the responsibility that we have, and that we should make sure China can't come in here and buy up land right next door to Ellsworth and then conduct operations against them. So that's why that bill was important to me, was because I recognize that as long as we control our own future, and as long as we control our own land and we can grow our own food in this country, that's why we have a farm bill in this country, is because we decided years ago it was important to grow our own food. And that with more and more of those assets being purchased by China, we are losing control of that food supply. So a farm bill gives us a safety net to make sure that you can have a good year in agriculture and pay your bills, but that you don't have a bad year and lose everything. And everybody has to sell out and not be able to feed ourselves. That farm bill makes sure that we have a safe and affordable food supply that every family can go to a grocery store and find food. And if you think that a pandemic was scary, wait until you go and you see that China now controls whether you're going to have groceries at your store locally or not. Other bills that I cared about very much were the education bills. We brought forward the anti-Semitism bill, which I already discussed. There's several others. There was a little bit of discussion over, some pipelines or something. I don't know if you guys remember any of those or not, but I'm teasing. But yeah, we had some other discussions that were going on. But instead of me going on and on about some of those issues, why don't I just let you guys ask questions or make comments on different things that you'd like some feedback on, and I'll share my thoughts and ideas, or let any of our legislators speak up to if they'd like to. So, who'd like to be first? Yes, sir.
Are you going to be Trump's running mate?
Oh my goodness. Look at you. You just guaranteed that I am never going to call on you again. I used to be able to say that we had never talked about it. I've known Donald Trump for years, and I worked with him for 2 years on tax reform when I was in Congress, so know him very well, but we have talked about it. So I will just say what I've told him is that I will do whatever it takes to help him win. Because right now it is Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and that's not even an easy contest in my book. The thing that I'm the most grateful for from President Trump is that when I was governor, he let me do my job. If you think Joe Biden would have let me keep this state open, or that he wouldn't have attacked me and persecuted me and punished me and tried to control what we did here in South Dakota, you're crazy. And I went from being on offense every single day when President Trump was in the White House to being on defense now. I think I spend half my time now just suing the federal government for trying to take away our freedoms or for trying to mandate things that I don't want to do here in South Dakota. I'm getting sued over whether I'm putting on our birth certificates whether they're still male or female. They don't want me to do that anymore. They want me to pay for every transgender surgery that happens in all of our Department of Corrections facilities. I'm getting sued over just different names of whatever we call everything. It doesn't matter. Social services. It's every activist organization in this country is convincing the Biden administration to come after and to punish South Dakota because we have enacted conservative principles and it worked. And it worked, and we are scaring them. We are a small state, but we have thrived because our people here made the decisions. The governor didn't make the decisions. I get to be your governor, but that doesn't mean I'm a dictator and that I get to tell you how to live your life and do what you do every day and what you get up in the morning. I recognize what the Constitution tells me my authority is and what it isn't, and that's not the agenda of the White House right now. They want to tell you what to do with your life and how to live it, and I just fundamentally disagree. That people ask me why I'm sending troops to the border again, and it is because we've had troops now 5 times to the border. We were the first state to send National Guard troops to the border. Other states had sent law enforcement. We sent National Guard because our National Guard are trained specifically to fall in and operate with other agencies and to work with them, but also for war zones, and it is a war zone down there. We have, the Mexican cartels are set up here in South Dakota. They are here in South Dakota on our tribal reservations, trafficking drugs and kids and sex trafficking out of South Dakota throughout the Midwest. And these communities in our tribal reservations are living in fear of the kind of danger and crime and violence and murder that is happening in Mexico and some of these horrible countries and at the border, that stopping them there makes it much more of a safer place here in South Dakota, and that's why we're engaged. The reason that I went there the day after it was last announced that the federal government was suing Texas was because I want you to realize what Joe Biden threatened to do. He said that he was going to federalize our National Guard troops. He was going to federalize them so that I would no longer be their commander-in-chief, so that he would then be their commander-in-chief, and he has the authority to do that under Title 10, which means he would take our South Dakota National Guard under his command, and he was going to be the first time in American history that he was going to pay soldiers to stand down, to not protect America. And what Texas had done is they had actually built a border that was working. They had built a border that was a shipping container with a cattle panel, which I loved, across the top of it, and then lined it with razor wire that even these able-bodied military-aged men couldn't get across because they had to crawl backwards over that cattle panel through razor wire, and they couldn't do it, and it was working, and that's when the federal government sued them to tear it down. It was because they could see that it actually was keeping people from coming into this country. So make no mistakes, it's an invasion and it's on purpose. And that is why South Dakota is engaged, is because it's not just happening in Texas, it's happening right here in South Dakota. And we've got some tribal leaders that I believe are personally benefiting from the cartels being there, and that's why they attack me every day. But I'm going to fight for the people who actually live in those situations, who call me and text me every day and say, please, dear Governor, please come help us in Pine Ridge. We are scared. Please help us in Mission. Please help us down here in Wounded Knee. Nobody should have to live like this with the danger that we live with. So there is that. During session this year, I gave a joint address telling the legislators what I saw and what I knew to be true and asking for their support. And they overwhelmingly that day passed a resolution in support of what Texas was doing and that we would support them, and then they helped to make sure that we have the resources to do so. So I appreciate them and their leadership doing that, because no other state has stepped up to protect us and to make sure that that border is being dealt with more than our South Dakota legislators. So thank you for that. So I didn't give you an answer on that because I don't know. The one thing I do know about President Trump is that he's unpredictable, right? He may say, oh, I need you to do this, and then tomorrow he might say, oh, I need you to do something else. So we'll just see. But I am going to help make him win because of what he does and what he needs to.
So you're on the short list.
I do know I'm on the short list because I get a lot of phone calls from him now all the time, and it's taking up a lot of my time. But it's good. It's good. He's doing a good job. What else? Yes.
I'm Fred Wagner. I live in Southern
Oh.
Cook County. And I've got 2 bills that I was really worried about or interested in. That's 201 and 203.
Yes.
One I'm very much against, one I'm very much for.
Yeah.
So how did you come down on them, and have they passed or not?
Well, those bills have passed and they'll be signed into law. I think I have signed all of them into law. And you know what I think people need to realize about these bills that have to do with building pipelines and economic development in South Dakota is that for the very first time we have a landowner's bill of rights. We are the only state in the country now that has in statute a landowner's bill of rights that protects landowners. I probably have been one of the most pro-private property rights legislators, governors that we've ever had in this country, and then as well as the lieutenant governor. And so to have those kind of protections in place that have that for landowners and those checks and balances, and have the county commission process still go forward, and the Public Utilities Commission, which is a quasi-judicial type organization, to have these hearings, I think is incredibly powerful. This will be the most transparent way to do economic development than we've done before in South Dakota. So I know that there's some people that are still unhappy with parts of the different bills. I would ask them to come meet with us and tell us what they don't like, because that's the wonderful thing about South Dakota, is you come and make a good argument and you have a debate, and if something needs to be changed, it can be changed. And we can have that discussion during legislative session. I've already, in my last town hall, committed to meet with a guy who had a couple of good ideas that we could do to protect private property rights, and I think that's fantastic. So I don't know if Ryan is here, he can run through that Bill of Rights if you want him to real quick, and he's an expert in this, and I made him my expert in my office on this, and he can kind of tell you what they are a little bit, and then we'll see if there's maybe a few more questions on how these pipelines are going forward.
203, ma'am, is the principal carry a gun in school.
Oh, sure.
With enhanced
You
permit.
can talk on that later.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Governor. My name is Ryan Bruner. I'm a senior policy advisor to Governor Noem. I used to be the commissioner of school and public lands for the state, and so I managed the state school lands quite a bit down here in Trip County and in western South Dakota. And in that process, I worked on and had easements with Keystone XL, which was not built, and the Dakota Access Pipeline, which was built, and worked on some of these projects. And so I followed 201, 1185, and 1186. There are 3 bills dealing with pipelines that passed this session. And so those 3 bills did a variety of things, but the Landowner Bill of Rights is one of the primary things that came out of that. It had some really good protections for landowners that didn't exist before. Things like if you don't use an easement for 5 years, it expires, so it's not a perpetual easement. It's limited to 99 years if it's a carbon pipeline, so it's not a perpetual easement again. You've got indemnity for landowners from liability. There's discussion going around, you see on Facebook, about whether or not somebody can get insurance if they have this pipeline across their property. And so that was put into state law to protect landowners. Burying the pipeline to 4 feet instead of 3 feet, which is the federal requirement. If you guys have ever driven a tractor like I have through a muddy field, you can sink in a little bit. And so having an extra foot is good for freeze-thaw line. It's also really good when it comes to making sure that line's not going to be impacted. Drain tile repair for the lifetime of the project. And a variety of things like that. Survey reform was one that I was really excited about. Now, when a PUC project, any PUC project, so there's oil pipelines, natural gas pipelines, is going to come on and survey to go get a permit from the PUC, which ultimately still has the decision-making authority. When they're going to do that, they now pay for that right to come on and survey. And so that didn't exist before. And those were all things that came up during Dakota Access, during Keystone XL, that were good landowner protections that were put in the state law with those series of 3 bills, along with streamlining the PUC process, which does still allow local input and local ordinances. And so if you look at, I visited with Mr. Boyle at the last hearing and pulled this up. If you look at section 6 of the bill, it says specifically, about halfway through, a router transmission facility, again, any project with the PUC, permitted by the commission under this chapter is not subject to any local land use, zoning, or building rule, regulation, or ordinance, unless the commission requires compliance with any rule, regulation, ordinance. And so the PUC has their judicial process the governor talked about. They can have a hearing and make sure that all the rules have a finding of fact, a conclusion of law, and a streamlined process to go through. And that's not to help one particular project. That would apply to a series of projects. And we saw that with the Keystone Pipeline. You saw that with Dakota Access. You saw that with Northern Natural Gas just put a new line in the southeast corner of the state. And so any of these projects, you need to have a process so that one county or one township doesn't impact an entire process across multiple states for all those types of projects. Electric transmission, any of those big projects, you have to have a transparent process. And so it got amended several times, and so make sure to read the final bill, because what started out at the beginning of the session is not what passed at the end. And so that Landowner Bill of Rights and some of those protections have come a long ways. Are the bills perfect? No, there's always improvements that can be made, but there certainly were some really good landowner protections put in the state law for the first time this last year that we can all be very happy about.
And the other bill you asked about was concealed carry in schools. And so that one has not been signed yet, but I will sign it once my legal... What happens is there's probably still 100 bills that I haven't signed into law yet. And my legal team goes through them, looks to see if there's a word that needs to be changed or if something is being taken out of context, if the statute reference is correct. When they do that, then I go through the bill and I look at it. I don't see any alarm bells going off with that. I anticipate signing that into law, unless we run into something like that. But that's something that's easily fixed through a style and form that the legislature comes back and then they just decide I'm right and agree with me and fix it, and then we all go home happy. So, what else do we have? Yes.
So these landowner, these pipeline bills.
Yes.
Will the landowners still have the right to say no to a pipeline project where they're going to use eminent domain for private gain when the pipeline project itself is not producing a usable product for the people, like roads, energy?
Well, these bills had nothing to do with eminent domain. I'll let Ryan speak specifically to what you're asking about because you're being very specific about that. And I want you all to get very clear in how you're thinking about this topic, because private property rights is very different than what you mean by landowner protections and what you're talking about as far as economic development. That everybody has private property rights, but what if I want a pipeline on my land? Does that protect my private property rights if I allow somebody else to shut down what I want to do with my land too? So there's two sides of every one of these issues and how you look at them, and you got to make sure that you're doing what is fair and right and what is constitutional, which is my first viewpoint. And so there's a little bit of a difference there. Most people are looking at this as, I don't want a pipeline on my land. There's a lot of people who do want a pipeline on our land, and are we infringing on their rights, their private property rights, by saying it can be shut down because one guy 20 miles away or 20 townships away or 20 counties away tells me that I can't. And that's always, what ends up happening is making sure that we have a transparent process that honors those private property rights and make sure that we're building projects that are beneficial for everybody. So I don't know, Ryan, if you had something you wanted to add specific to what she was asking.
No, those three bills, there were several bills this session that dealt with different changes to eminent domain. None of those bills passed and made it to the governor's desk. And so these three bills, if you're not going to have any changes to eminent domain law, putting new landowner protections into place is a good compromise for coming up with a solution so that people are compensated fairly. I forgot there's $1 per foot surcharge that was added on for the landowners to protect them.
That want it. What about the ones that don't want it?
They don't want what?
Don't want the pipeline going through their property.
Yep.
You still have the same process you had before at the county level. You have the PUC process at the county level as well. And that's all laid out now in the statute, which we can get you the bill. And if you have some ideas or some changes that you think still need to be made, then I would ask you to come meet with me. Come chat with me and see what that is.
That the authority from the county level is going to be overridden by state.
The county, go ahead.
Well, that was the part that I read, right? Exactly out of Section 6 of the bill that says that PUC can incorporate that in. Because if you talk about county authority, now with the ruling that came out of this, you could look at these other projects like Dakota Access and other oil pipelines. One county in the entire country could shut down a project by passing a setback that doesn't allow something to be built. So we can't have specific statutes for specific projects. The idea is that you have a process that is a judicial process through the PUC, and they still have to apply, right? So the carbon pipeline that everyone's talking about, they never had a hearing in front of the PUC because of the local zoning. When they showed up for that very first hearing, they said, well, we can't comply with local zoning, and so we're not going to have the permit process here. And so there's no guarantee that they'll get a permit when they go through that process, right? And so that's the existing law now. It's the existing law, and none of that was changed with any of these three bills. And so these three bills put in landowner protections and still allow the counties to be involved. But if you look at what even in Iowa, where a federal judge said that the county ordinances are superseded by state and federal law, and that's been appealed to the 8th Circuit. So that could be binding on South Dakota, depending on that ruling, and then we don't get all the protections that got put in the law this year. And so by putting these protections in the law and allowing the PUC to incorporate those local ordinances, we actually give them the force of state law by having the PUC put them into the permit. And so there's no guarantee what the PUC is going to decide. They'll have a hearing, they'll have witnesses, there'll be cross-examination, and then they'll get to decide. And so it's not a yes, it's not a no. There's no guarantees with that, but there's a guarantee that there's a process, that it's a judicial process, so that everyone has a fair and transparent hearing.
I think what it's important to remember is that Summit Carbon, screwed this whole thing up. That they did a very poor job of putting in a project and communicating with landowners and listening to their concerns and doing it correctly. And they never once got a hearing in front of the PUC. If you remember correctly the facts of what's gone down here the last 6 months to a year, Navigator's the only one who had that PUC hearing. And now we've put in place more protections so that it's actually going to be a fair and transparent hearing, so that actually people will have their voices heard in a better setting that will give the true facts. And we're asking that the dispersion studies all be public, the plume studies, it's all going to be public, everything will be out in the open. That was never happening before. The only one who had a hearing before was Navigator, and that's the one that got shut down. So we've got a lot of protections here and a lot more transparency than we've ever had before. And the situation is that if you still don't like it, then I would say definitely show up and tell us what you don't like. I mean, it's not that I didn't write this bill, and I'm not a fan of carbon pipelines. So I don't get to be a dictator. That's not my job. I can have an opinion, and I've told them all my opinions, but the legislature worked hard on this bill to make sure they protected private property rights, and they made sure that we were going to do this in a transparent manner, and the decisions were going to be made that were going to be good for South Dakota, and they landed in a good spot to where I could sign that bill because it was constitutional. What else? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Dustin Swatzel.
Yeah.
I have a couple businesses here in Cook County. 38 years old, entrepreneur, have been most of my life. I settled in South Dakota because of the opportunity for growth, possibly expansion, things like you've been talking about in your business. But I feel my world's coming to more of us. It's coming into this point. Some of the bills that you guys have passed or are going to pass at the beginning of the year, such as House Bill 1125. Also,
which one is it? I'm not good at numbers. The Delta 8 one. Yeah, you sell Delta 8?
I have a smoke shop.
Okay.
Which Delta 8, some of the cannabinoids you guys have listed upon removing from my store. It takes up about 50% of my income for one of my businesses. The next business I've invested into is the new industry in South Dakota, which is medical marijuana. I also have a medical marijuana store, which is a separate business from my smoke shop.
Okay.
So at the beginning of the year, there's another bill that was thrown out there, which is now inflated. Costs almost doubled.
It was licensing, right?
Correct.
So you all should know that in South Dakota that what we said when medical marijuana passed on the ballot was that it would fund itself, that the industry would fund itself, that the state government wasn't going to spend taxpayer money. Where am I standing that is jacking this thing up? Is this going to be okay? Is that it would fund itself and the operation of it. The taxpayers wouldn't be funding the medical marijuana program. And I have for decades been in approval of medical marijuana. I'm a supporter of it. I just want it to be regulated. I want people to know what they're putting in their body. I know it works, but I also know that medical marijuana can be at different potency levels. It can be at different, and it should be regulated. And people should know that when they take something, what it's going to do and what the effects are. I've never been in favor of recreational marijuana. I'm just never going to get there. I've never met anybody that got smarter smoking dope. I mean, or more motivated to go to work in the morning because they sat up and smoked dope all night. So I'm just not going to be in favor of that. But that doesn't mean I get to make laws in the state and not sign them. If I challenged one in court because it was written unconstitutionally, but medical marijuana we have implemented. The reason that the licensing fees have gone up is because it's costing a lot more to run the industry in the state. And because we have a lot of people that have gotten medical cards that are using it, that the license fees are reflecting what they are in other states. Now, what we did as far as an increase was what other states are doing. We're not out of line with what all the other states are doing, and that was my main priority, is that we treated you fairly. that we didn't drive you to another state, that if you wanted to operate a medical marijuana operation here, you could, and that we would treat you fairly. Delta 8, I'm a little freaked out by Delta 8 because I just don't know what it is, and I'm not an expert on it. I think it can be dangerous, but I don't know if I got an expert on staff probably need my Secretary of Health to call you and chat a little bit about it. But are you an expert on Delta 8?
I'm a marijuana person, so they make me.
Okay, there you go.
So what I would say is that what we had happening is Delta 8 was being sold in convenience stores, being sold everywhere. Minors could
I
get it.
never agreed on that either.
And that was even in Clome, we had kids that were using it. And so it had went through the legislature last year, and everybody wanted something to happen. They just wanted, could we package it differently? Could we do this? Well, when you have a drug that is sometimes made in another country, we don't even know what's in it. It obviously could be even worse than real marijuana. And that all depends on who's selling it and how they're selling it, but it just ended up being a big disaster for our kids. So we ended up voting, to not have it legal. And of course, it is a hard decision for the business owners that have dove into that. But again, as a parent, I'm not going to be able to sit there and let that happen. So these are some tough decisions that we have to make.
Yeah, but I do want to get you connected with Melissa. You'll love her from my Department of Health, and chat with her because she is, I think she's the first time that we've had a Secretary of Health that's an actual medical provider. She is not a doctor. She is opened critical access clinics across the state and, does a very out-of-the-box type of medical treatment.
Question.
Sure.
Do you think that the overregulation of the industry is the reason why it cannot be self-sufficient?
No, I think it can be self-sufficient.
It can be, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't think that's why.
believe it's
I think we've been very good. You don't think so?
No, it's tough. It's a tough
Huh.
industry. Yeah.
Well, I don't want somebody
Especially
meeting with
prices.
some doctor over the internet getting a
How does the
medical card
how does
after.
the little guy stand to compete in the industry, small business in South Dakota, when you're treating us like corporate with the inflation of prices and costs? Expenses
Well, your
for our
biggest
store.
challenge is probably going to be in South Dakota. Is you're also competing with the tribes.
I don't have any conditions.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll also say, I fight every day to try to keep this program going. Well, when we have our meetings, maybe not every day, but I will say that when the bill passed, when things passed, we had recreational and medical marijuana. Everybody got into the business, but if you look at how many dispensaries per patient, that structure is never going to carry through. You're never going to be able to fiscally run that many dispensaries for how many patients you have. And I think the pop-up clinics are trying to up the patients, when in reality, if you look at the chronic debilitating medical conditions, we don't have that many patients that have those conditions to fill those dispensaries. And that's business. And it's just going to be hard that some of those businesses will have to close.
Do you think pregnant women should be able to smoke marijuana?
Do I think what?
Pregnant women should be able to smoke marijuana?
Well, I'm not a medical doctor, but it doesn't seem wise to me.
I'm being sarcastic.
Okay, all
Because I
right.
am a medical doctor, and I'm telling you, that smoking marijuana is bad for your health and your future generations. And that's
Yeah. But, so I spent a lot of time when I
the
was,
rate is higher
yeah.
in the states where they legalize marijuana because they get distracted and they cause accidents and they die, even excluding young.
Well, and I would just say there's a lot of consequences to some of the laws that change around recreational marijuana. And as far as law enforcement, social services,
Teenagers
all of the
that are
things we
supposed to take offense
referenced,
of the gun,
yes.
They're taking 3 of them, and then they're tunneled for 24 hours. And
Yeah.
you watch their breathing, make sure they don't stop breathing.
It's a very different type of marijuana than what it was 30, 40 years ago. Are you arguing with me because you think I'm right?
No.
Okay. Okay, you're arguing with me. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out who are we arguing with because I'm pretty sure we agreed. I spent a lot of time in SAMHSA. You do have to know, it is a proven fact, and I will get you the research if you need it. If you have children under the age of 26, especially young adult males, that are actively smoking marijuana every day, there's a chemical reaction in their brain that makes them much more, over 50% more have a tendency to have mental challenges, schizophrenia, be bipolar. At that growing time in their brain and with the chemical development they have going on, at that time of growth, with that kind of interaction with this potency, it has dramatic impacts on their mental health. And that's what we're going to have to deal with. That's what we're going to have to deal with in 10 to 15 years from now, and especially in a lot of these states that have just wrapped their arms around it. So, other questions on other topics? Yes, sir.
I got a question which is maybe a little different.
Okay.
What's local. You had federal experience, and with people asking if you could be Trump's runner or running mate, you probably already seen this. The FBI at the worship level becomes so politicized that I don't doubt that if you do become a runner, they're going to be digging around your background. But what I think from an economic standpoint is right now the FBI is still on hold in June 2023, I think. The FBI wants to expand its facilities between $4 and $7 billion. And Schumer is the big push guy. He wants to keep it back there. I think that the geographical center of the United States is just west of Rapid City, down in Alaska and Hawaii. That's where it should be. I would like to see you put a little pressure on him. If nothing else, just scare the crap out of Schumer.
Yeah, I can do that. I think I already am scaring the crap out of Schumer.
I had 31 years of police experience. I used to appreciate the FBI and I trusted it. Later years, I didn't. I mean, I really didn't like what's going on. That probably affects our federal government to all extent. You see some of these phony lawsuits that are coming up. I mean, there aren't even lawsuits. I mean, that's where you strip people of their rights. So if you bring it to Browns and Boone usually comment or send me anything when you want money, but that's it. Dusty Johnson is doing a damn good job of keeping us up with what he's doing.
Good.
But I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let's say,
Good suggestion.
get a crap out of Schumer and get it moving from here. We could use that.
It's become a sad state of affairs when you can't trust your intelligence agencies to be honest brokers of trying to keep America safe. Yes.
Do you trust the CDC and the NIH?
No, but I've gone to meet with them several times, challenging them and questioning them on what they're doing. That's why you have seen us in South Dakota start our own medical caches in the state. So we have 80% of our drugs come out of China, are processed through India. We don't control our own pharmaceutical supply, and it's basics like penicillin, the albuterol, things that we need, insulin, that we need just for, I had a little boy that could barely breathe and had terrible asthma and breathing issues when he was a little boy. I can't imagine what I would have done if I couldn't get him albuterol to keep him alive when he was little. So I am very concerned about the fact that we don't get good information out of CDC and the NIH. I do not trust them. I don't trust the World Health Organization either. And so therefore we in South Dakota are building our own caches, our own supplies of pharmaceutical supplies. I'm trying to figure out how we do pharmaceutical manufacturing right here in South Dakota so we control it. I'm going to look at some new machines that have been developed that will allow us to do that here so we aren't reliant on people even outside of our state for what we need to keep our people safe and treat them. And there's just not enough hours in the day, but I hope that answers your question.
Do you trust the CDC's own data?
Can I let somebody else ask a question? let me ask these guys and I'll chat with you afterwards, okay?
With all the stuff with illegal immigrants and the sanctuary states, cities deciding that maybe that wasn't a great idea. There were some rumblings or some rumors I heard the other day that a couple of these governors are talking about in New York and other places just loading them up on buses and sending them to the interior. So
well, that's the problem is ICE knows where they have sent people. They're denying that they do, but they know where they have sent these illegal immigrants. And they're illegally here and need to be deported, first of all. But they will not give that to governors. So people ask me all the time, do we have people here? And I don't know. They won't give me any information, and the federal government won't cooperate with us on if that is happening. What I would say is that they, your question specifically dealing with illegal immigration sanctuary states, do I think they will end up here? They could. They could. I'll do all I can to protect us from having violent criminals here, but you need to know that we have people on the Noem terrorist watch list coming into this state, that we also have people that Venezuela has emptied out their prisons and their mental health institutions and sent those people to come to America because our border has been open. And they've done that because they don't want the responsibility for caring for those people or the financial responsibility anymore. So they've sent them here. So we're not getting the best of the best. You know, we're getting everybody else's problems and they're sending them to us, and they're not here because they want to make America great again, which I think is pretty special already, but I think we can do better. And listen, if we lose this country, where do we go? Where else is it better? I mean, we woke up better and more blessed than 99% of the people in this world just because we woke up in this country. So as depressing as it all seems sometimes, we should get pretty excited about the fact that we still live in America and that we live in South Dakota and that this is a wonderful place to be. And I'm just going to ask you one thing. I got to close because I guess I'm running out of time. But could we all just, you know, stop being so offended by each other? You know, we live in a country that just loves to be offended. And we're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they said that, I'm so offended, and oh my gosh, I can't do that. You know what, we just need to get over yourselves. Because I had a pastor years ago that said to me, Christy, people are going to throw offenses out at you all the time. But you're the one who decides if you want to bend over, pick it up, and carry it around with you. And then you're the one carrying the burden. And he said, so you have the opportunity every day that when somebody says something to you, just let it go. Just let it go. And what's wrong with this country is that everybody quit talking to each other and having normal conversations. And why don't you start by just asking people questions and listening and learning? I don't know if these pipeline bills are perfect, but I'm open to ideas on if they could be. I'm open to your ideas on what we can do to make sure that you got a chance to be treated fairly just like everybody else. So I think, and I'm probably way more conservative of a governor than you've ever had before. But that doesn't mean that I get to get offended by people and blow people up and start yelling at them and not work together, because I don't think that's any way to run a state. I think if we work together, we can do some incredible things here, and we do it by talking to each other. And we end up with better policy. Different perspectives bring better policy. Every time I sit down at a table with people that I disagree with, they end up teaching me things. And I learn from that, and I'm a better governor. So that's why I do these town halls, is so that I can learn from all of you and what your concerns are, and I can go make sure that the decisions I'm making are better and that they serve you better. So let's all just decide we're not offended anymore. We love each other, and we're going to keep working together to do what we can to make things right. And thank you for coming, though. This means the world to me.